Om. 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 Sahana vavatu. Sahanau bhunaktu. Saha viryam karavavahai. Tejasvinavadhitamastu. Ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We'll chant verses 16 to 20. Thank you, sir. Natyashnatastu yogosti na chaikantamanashnatah na chati swapnashilasya jagrato naiva charjuna yuktahara viharasya yuktacheshthasya karmasu युक्तस्वप्नावबोधस्य योगो भवति दुःखः यदा विनियतं चित्तम् आत्मन्येवावतिष्ठते निःस्पृहः सर्वकामेभ्यः युक्त इत्युच्यते तदा यथा दीपो निवातस्थः नेङ्गते सोपमा स्मृता योगिनो यतचित्तस्य युञ्जतो योगमात्मनः यत्रो परमते चित्तं निरुद्धं योगसेवया यत्र चैवात्मनात्मानं पश्यन्नात्मनि तुष्यति. Hari Om. Namaskaram to everyone. We will chant verse 18. Yada viniyatam chittam atmanyevavatisthate nispruha sarvakamebhyah yukta ityuchyate tada yada viniyatam chittam atmanyevavatisthate nispruha sarvakamebhyah yukta ityuchyate tada yada tada. You see the first and the last word of the verse, yada is when, tada means then. So cause and effect. A logical point is being made here. Not here throughout the text, throughout the Shastras, they are picture of logic and reason. So here he says, when a perfectly controlled mind only rests in the self, free from the longing for all objects of desire, sarva kamebhya, sarva, all, then it is said to be established in yoga. When a perfectly controlled mind only rests in the self, free from the longing for all objects of desire, then it is said to be established in yoga. So verses 16 and 17 give us the essential prerequisite for practicing yoga, where he spoke about the regulation of eating, recreation, and responses, which is receipt, reaction, and responses. Thank you, sir. Can I have the audience back, please? So 16 and 17 spoke of that. So one who has regulated all the life's activities results in a perfect control of the mind. Viniyatam. All of us have achieved this control relative. We have not attained an absolute mastery of the mind. And when does one gain an absolute mastery? Only when one has entirely placed the mind on the self. To the extent the mind is in the world, it is subjected to the push and pull of the worldly objects. The senses push the senses out into the world. There's a push from the senses, and there's a pull from the sense objects. So the push and pull of the world influences the mind when the thought and attention is on the world. So when you're extroverted, you are subjected to this push and pull. You will have no chance to sustain the force of impact on the mind. The push from the senses, the pull from the sense objects, this causes considerable wear and tear on the mind. Such a mind is termed extroverted, can never be peaceful and happy, can never be controlled. But the moment you have pitched your mind on the self, to that extent, the mind can be controlled. There is no more the push and the pull of the external world. That's what he says, Viniyatam. So again, this is a beautiful way of actually measuring to what extent have you got control over your mind. So if the mind is on the world, subjected to push and pull, there's no control. When the mind is on the self, you're not subjected to the push and pull. You have a fair bit of control of the mind, Viniyatam. And then he says, Sarva Kamebhyaha. The first is an external discipline. The next is an internal discipline. There is no internally the mind constantly craving. There is no gurgling of desires within. So the mind also is rid of all the desires. If you do this, then he says, you are established in yoga. So the entire exercise is to try to make your mind more introverted. The more introverted is nothing but taking your mind off the world, putting it on the self. So whatever necessary spiritual practices, whatever necessary methodologies you adopt to refrain the mind from rushing into the world and lodging onto the self, if you are able to achieve it, hold it without any restlessness, without any uneasiness, that is a sign of having established in yoga. Because the mind is not going to listen to you. The mind is going to present itself as it's like you take your dog for a walk. How many times have you not seen that your pet is not listening to you? Many a time the pet decides where the master should go, including this morning. I went for a little ride and I saw the dogs were there pulling the master. So the dog here is the mind. You are the intellect. You got to command the mind where you want to go, but the mind decides where you have to go. So the dog decides where you have to go, what you have to do. So as long as you are extroverted, you will have no control over the mind. As long as you're introverted, you find the mind fairly cooperates with you. But whatever the control, the moment there is a frustration, you got to give into the mind. Don't overdo it. That very wear and tear, that very friction will cause damage, perhaps a long-term damage. There will be resistance. You got to fight the resistance, but don't resist, don't push it beyond its capacity until you do damage. So it's a very healthy competition with the mind. Sometimes you give in, sometimes you face to face, but the ultimate objective is you want to control it. Okay. So he's just mentioning as a matter of fact. All right. That verse was the concluding verse from verses 10 to 18. If you remember, he spoke of the external and the internal disciplines required for meditation. So those set of verses spoke about the necessary discipline. So all the while, what is necessary to meditate? And there's enough we have spoken about and done justice to what the text is very clearly reiterating. All right. Now, the next set of verses from verses 19 to 24, he says, how a controlled mind remains peaceful. The previous topic, external and internal disciplines are essential, required for meditation. And here he says, he clarifies how the moment you have a control over your mind, it essentially remains peaceful. It may sound obvious, but you will see how beautifully he sails us through. All right. So in the 19th verse, he gives a beautiful analogy, which is very fascinating. Okay. Verse 19, please. Yatha deepo nivatasthaha negate sopama smrita yogino yata chittasya yunjato yogamatmanaha yatha deepo nivatasthaha negate sopama smrita yogino yata chittasya yunjato yogamatmanaha yatha deepo nivatasthaha na ingate. As a lamp in a windless place does not flicker, yatha deepo nivatastha nengate. Ingate. Na ingate. Ingate means flicker, does not flicker. A simile that reflects a yogi whose subdued mind while practicing union with the self. So a person who is practicing yoga has achieved a state where he has got his mind under control, subdued mind when he's practicing union, compared to a lamp in a windless place. That's all. Now, in any simile, there are certain aspects of comparison. So a mind which is controlled is compared to a lamp in a windless place. Now, there are 8 points of comparison. So if you start writing down the 8 points, you'll see the analogy. You'll see the beauty of what is there in the simile. Now, the flame represents the mind. The wind represents the various passions, the various desires. As we learned, the more the desires, the more the mind is agitated, less the desires, the more peaceful you are. This is a conclusion you can have. More desires, more agitated, less desires, more peaceful. So when the wind is the passion, the desires. Now, when the light is flickering, it is of no use to you. Is it of any use to you when the light is flickering? It's no use. Similarly, when the mind is disturbed, what happens when the mind is disturbed? Jai Shri Ma. Can you tell me what happens when your mind is disturbed?
Confusion in the mind.
We
Our
can't
mind
hear
will
you.
be confused. Mind is confused.
Correct. Okay. When your mind is confused, which is nothing but when your mind is disturbed, what happens?
Our peace of mind will get disturbed.
Mama, correct. Your mind is disturbed. You've lost your peace of mind. But then what happens after that?
We are not able to concentrate in anything.
You're not able to concentrate on anything. You don't know whether you're putting salt or you're putting sugar in the food.
Yes. Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
So even simplest of things, you have no control, isn't it? In fact, your physiological functions are completely imbalanced, isn't it? The mind, when it is not calm, an agitated mind clouds the intellectual clarity. So when your mind is disturbed, you don't think clearly. You can't think straight. You've lost a clarity of thought, isn't it? So that's what is being compared to when the light is flickering, it's of no use. So let's say you have 20% of intellect with you. That 20% intellect is available only when your mind is 100% calm. It's too much to expect. What? Enna Jayama, what is too much to expect?
Hariom Guruji, too much to expect that your intellect is available.
No. Too much to expect. Not the intellect available. What is too much to expect? Now, what did I say? What is the equation I gave?
When the light is flickering, you cannot.
No, not the light. What is the equation I gave? What the percentage is? Okay, no problem. No problem. Vaidyanathanji?
The equation you mentioned was when the mind is 100% calm, 20% of the intellect is available to you.
Now, what is too much to expect? Again, we have lost your audio, sir.
1 minute. It is too much to expect that the mind will be 100% calm.
That's the point. You got it. Each one of us have got a certain level of intellect because you have worked with it. If you have invested your time on your own spiritual development, if you have gained the clarity of thought, you could have 40, 50, 70% of wisdom, which is the clarity, which is intellectual sharpness. But all of us have got the same mind. But the question is, the proportion what we're saying is your existing intellect, optimum intellect of yours is available only when your mind is 100% calm. But that is too much to expect. Your mind is never 100% calm, isn't it? You'll not believe, there was a delay of 6 minutes for me to log into the class today. What I was doing, 2 hours this morning, I've lost all the work I had done of my notes into the iPad, all had gone, disappeared. So I had downloaded again, and for God's sake, I said, Abba, at least the raw material is there, not the additional notes I've written. All that gone. And suddenly it asked me for a software update. I said, update. I updated, kept everything ready. I put on the system at 11:27. I switch on, blank. Everything wiped off. There is no file. There is no notes for me to take the class today. Then the next instruction was given, please let the bhajans continue. No, I have to gather my sense of what am I to do next? And then a ray of help came, and somehow I could retrieve the raw file of this particular chapter. Other chapters, I have to figure out what happened to them. So if your mind is lost your balance, it is impossible to have your clarity, think clearly, do anything that is rational or makes sense to you. You may say, what is it, sir? But this is my wealth. If you ask me, what is my wealth? This is my wealth. The notes I'm talking about is something I wrote 25 years ago. It's been with me. It's my treasure. I've got the hard copies. Now, I don't have that with me. I didn't have the book with me in the center where I'm taking the class from. Otherwise, say, put this equipment aside, hold on to that piece of book and take. So what I'm trying to tell you is, it is paramount to keep your mind calm at all times. It's not important, it's paramount. But since the mind is not calm, what would happen is, let's say if your mind is calm only 70%, to that extent, proportionately, your intellectual clarity drops. If it is 50%, you only have 10% intellectual clarity. Sir, the next logical question you can ask me, if I don't have intellectual clarity, so what, sir? What would happen if I don't have my clarity? What the big fuss you're making? What would happen if I don't have the clarity?
Wrong decisions.
Huh?
Wrong decisions. We'll take wrong decisions.
You will make wrong decisions. You will make a blunder of a choice. And thereafter, life is fait accompli. You have no choice but to face the consequences of the choices you have made. The law of karma says, when the bullet has left the barrel, you have no choice but to face the consequences where the barrel has pointed. The bullet will go in the direction. You can't say, oops, I should have held my trigger. You only pull the trigger. Now you better face the consequences. Hope you don't go and kill anyone there. You may not have intended, but you will have to face the consequences. Each one of us are defined by the choices you make, and the choices you make is made by the intellect, which makes the choice. The job of the intellect is to choose, and the intellect is functional only to the extent you have, and it can be optimal to you when your mind is calm. Therefore, now you know how the connection is all falls back to the mind. It is staggering if you don't see the picture, if you don't see the consequences of not keeping your mind calm. I can't lend that vision to you. Your whole life pings on this. So the light that's flickering is of no use. Similarly, a mind that's disturbed is of no use to you. The third point. The fourth point is, it's some kind of a shade that protects the lamp from the wind. As simple as, you see the lamp behind me. It is just sort of caged in a nice jar. So even if I have put on a fan or is there any breeze, it protects the flame. So it's the shade that protects the flame from the wind. What is it that protects the mind from the passions? Sitaramji.
Knowledge.
Knowledge.
That's what protects you, because you understand the play of the passions, etc. And you know that if you do not control the passions, then your efforts in doing something are diffused. So knowledge of this helps you focus your mind and keep it calm.
Knowledge of this. Fair enough. In fact, I would just go to the previous two verses we just learned, or we learned recently, about the necessity to bring in a sense of regulation and moderation into the various activities in life, isn't it? So when there is a spirit of regulation and moderation, it is that which helps to keep the mind calm. Mere knowledge is of no use. It is that self-imposed regulation. It's a self-discipline of moderating my waking and sleeping, my eating habits and sleeping habits. That is the degree of contact with the world, etc. That we learned. Verse 16 and 17 spoke about. Only when you keep that in place and also proportion your sattva, rajas, tamas, that gives you an environment where your mind is always in a spiritual retreat. In a Hariji, spiritual retreat. Correct? Right. So the shade protects the flame from the wind. The spiritual disciplines protect you from the potential danger. Is something like in Ramayana, Lakshmana drew the Lakshmana Rekha. So do you have a Lakshmana Rekha which protects you from danger? The moment you cross it, you are falling a prey to the senses and the sense objects that the 10-headed monster is going to come and destroy you. So it is a imaginary Rekha you must have within you. I don't know. Are you able to draw a parallel of Lakshman Rekha to the mind? Rajima, how do you explain the concept of Lakshman Rekha to the mind? That's going to protect you, protect the mind from the passions, the winds.
When you have a disciplined thinking, then it protects you from going extroverted and out into the world of sense objects.
The Lakshman Rekha of the mind to protect you from the constant passions so that you don't lose your track. You're not drawn away.
Could it be the scriptures and the Guru?
They help, though. The scriptures and the Guru help facilitate, but it's something which you have to put for yourself. What is that
The effort.
Rekha? Effort, again, very generic. No problem. I understand where you're coming from. Reflection. Rajyama says reflection. Tinkima says regulation of the three receipts. Sadhana, abhyas, right proportion. the question, Ashama, is what are the banks? So that the water doesn't swell the banks and inundate the fields. Correct example you're given. So Hariji is very graphically describing the intellect. But what is the yardstick the intellect works?
In in Ramayana, Lakshman is equated to our intellect. So when they say Lakshman Rega, you have to go as per our intellect, subtle intellect. So subtle intellect is how it is guiding, and our conscience, both subtle intellect and conscience, they go parallelly, hand in glove.
All right. In fact, okay. Yeah, Tinkima.
Hariom Guruji. Actually, everybody has mentioned everything, but all of it comes under the intellect, because it is the intellect which governs the mind and governs our actions and helps us to choose the right action and to develop and that itself will keep us within the banks. It will lead to viveka, vairagya, moderation, regulation of 3 receipts. But to keep the intellect strong and to keep further strengthening it, that is where the study, reflection, manan, nidhi, vyasana, and Brahma Muhuratam study 4 to 6 a.m. I think on a continuous daily basis would really help. Because if we don't practice it, then we know it intellectually. It's like I have the treasure in my cupboard. I look at it from time to time, but I never take it out and use it.
My only clarification to that is all what you have said, including what everybody has said, they're missing one essential point in the equation, without which the entire Lakshman Rekha has no meaning.
Introversion, I mean, we shouldn't be. No?
Yeah, Sitaramji.
I would say the Lakshman Rekha is really the code of conduct that you decide for yourself. For example, that I'll not break the laws of the land. I'll be disciplined in terms of practicing yoga in the mornings. So these are the Lakshman Rekhas that you will draw, within which you will act and behave, both morally, ethically, and say physically. So that will help you in terms of conducting yourself and having a, let's say, a calmer mind.
So if I can, your thinking is right. In fact, if I can help you all with this additional point, no action per se is neither right or wrong, isn't it? No action per se is neither good nor bad. If that be the point, then bring it along with the concept of Lakshman Rekha. There's nothing right or wrong per se. There's nothing right or wrong per se.
Yeah.
But then where does Lakshman Rekha come in? How do you bring in the concept of self-discipline or self-control or tapas, etc.? Everything, where does all come in then?
Then it's the motive behind that action.
All of you got to think differently. Yeah, Tinky Ma.
So, Guruji, it could be balancing the three gunas. So actually, everybody has different the gunas in different proportions.
NO.
No, I thought moving from tamas to rajas.
See, that it affects in the progression from tamas to sattva. That is another description of growth. Harishi, you wanted to say something, Harishi?
No, Guruji. I thought it was intention, the intent, but it's obviously not.
It's not. It's not the
And
intention.
intent is based on the goal.
Huh?
It's the focus. What is
What
the
did you
goal?
say? What is the goal?
Goal.
None of you have said the word goal. Lakshman Rekha is only with reference to a goal. An action is neither right or wrong. An action can become wrong with reference to a same goal. The same action can become right with reference to another goal. So it is, what is it you want to achieve in life? An intellect and goal are two different terms conveying the same thing. Remember this. It is the intellect that conceives the goal. My goal is self-purification. My goal is self-development. Or is my goal self-realization? So what I would have to do for self-purification is totally different to what I would have to do for self-realization. So the yardsticks are far different. I don't think it is right for me to do. You may not be understood by others. You may be misunderstood, but yet, as far as you're concerned, you're true to yourself. So the Lakshman Rekha is, when an action doesn't take you towards your goal, you would not do it. Because per se, there's nothing wrong doing it. But if an action doesn't remind you of the goal, I will not do it. Full stop. If an action resonates me with my goal, I will continue to do it. That is the mental Lakshman Rekha you will have. So if anything is dussang, you will not do it. Anything is satsang, you will do it. And how you ascertain an action, right or wrong, is what you want to achieve in your life. It's the goal. An intellect has no role to play if you don't have a goal. It's a direction. It's intellect that gives a direction. Yes, it's the correct Vaidyanathan. The Lakshman Rekha is the boundary, which is when you know an action is detrimental to my growth. It doesn't take me to my goal. That's when I say I practice a little restraint. I pull my mind out of it. Otherwise, I have a leash over my mind, but I've let it go wherever it wants to go. I'm not destroying the mind. I'm not curbing the mind. I'm not strangling the mind. I'm giving it the freedom. But yet giving it the freedom with ever alertness to pull it back whenever it has to be pulled back. Spiritual path is not a path of punishment. Spiritual path is a path of evolution with freedom. You got to allow the mind to run free and then give it a direction for it to grow higher. It's not, discipline is not strangling and punishing and destroying it. The mind is a beautiful entity. You can't destroy it. You got to allow it to blossom. It's like you got to give the child the freedom and then give a direction to the child to do the right thing. You can't keep on imposing the child do's and don'ts. The child is not going to evolve that way, isn't it? You can't educate a child by imposing exactly the same way. So moving on. So when the flame is not disturbed, what happens to the flame? When the flame is not disturbed by the winds and the passions, it points upwards. It shoots up. Similarly, when the mind, which is not disturbed or not fallen a prey to the passions, the desires of the external world, when it's not extroverted, it becomes meditative, it becomes contemplative, it turns upward. This is a natural state. If you have achieved the capacity to keep the mind calm, it naturally goes upward. Point 6. When the flame is disturbed, what do? The flame is disturbed, you put off the flame, isn't it? It's flickering. You can't allow the flickering flame to continue. So you put off the flame. What remains? The fuel still remains. Similarly, when your mind is disturbed, Badrinathji, what happens? When the mind is disturbed, what happens? I'm drawing a parallel here. The question is, when the flame is continuously flickering, you put off the flame. And then further to that, I said, the flame is off, but the fuel is still there. Similarly, since we were saying the flame is the mind, if the mind is continuously gets agitated, what happens thereafter? Yes, Badriji.
You try and focus your energies somewhere else, refocus, so that it's like the fuel left in that flickering flame that you mentioned. So try and redirect your energy to something that has a higher value for you.
So no. The first half of the equation is when the flame is flickering, you put off the flame. Now, what is that compared to? When the mind is extremely agitated, what happens?
We discussed that earlier, right? You cannot think clearly when the mind is.
Then next step, extreme agitation, what happens? It incapacitates you.
Right. You cannot perform.
You can't perform action. Can't perform action.
Right.
Extreme grief, you can't act.
Right.
Extreme joy also, you cannot act. You don't know what you're doing. That's the reason in moments of extreme grief or even extreme joy, you find it is the near and dear who take over the whole show because you become incapacitated. Emotion overwhelms you. You don't know what's the right thing to do. What needs to be done? You have no clarity because you become incapacitated. Your action stops. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Fuel remains means mind is agitated, action stops. The fuel, the vasanas are still there within you. Isn't it? I'm just trying that specific aspect of comparison. I'm just trying to give in to what's conveyed. There's more couple of more points. But if you see carefully, you see a parallel. Are you able to see a parallel, Ji?
Right.
Right. I think Jitendra Ji, you were raising your arm, sir. But you want to say something?
Just I want to say that we lose our goal when mind is disturbed. That's it. I don't know whether my audio is reaching you.
Yes, you're very audible. Yes.
when our mind is disturbed, we lose our goal. We do not have any control whatsoever on our actions.
Correct. You're right. In fact, you are saying exactly what the point was said, that when you're disturbed, you lose complete control over your actions. Your actions don't take you towards your objective, which is the goal. So you've lost your present, you've lost your future.
Yes, yes, yes.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate. So it's so important that you keep your mind in this moment now, here. Otherwise, we all pay the price. The seventh point is the wick. The wick is erect because of the wax. Similarly, the ego is erect because of the vasanas. Lastly, the flame lasts as long as there is the fuel, which is the mind, and action lasts as long as there are vasanas. And the moment the vasanas are exhausted, there is no more the mind, there's no more individuality, there's no more vasanas. No more vasanas, no more actions, no more ego. Everything finished. So just by saying, as a lamp in a windless place does not flicker, a yogi with subdued mind practicing union with the self reflects the same. So whenever you're lighting a lamp, it should remind you of this. That's the impact. If you have asserted this thought, whenever you do that simple ritual of lighting a lamp, it will remind you. This is the power of association of thought. Okay, move on. Verse 20. Yatro paramate chittam niruddham yoga sevaya yatra chaivatmanatmanam pashyannatmani tushyati. Yatro paramate chittam niruddham yoga sevaya yatra chaivatmanatmanam pashyannatmani tushyati. Rajima, please read the translation for me.
When the mind, restrained by the practice of yoga, attains quietude, and when seeing the self along by the self, it is satisfied in the self.
Yatro paramate chittam. When uparamate, chittam is the mind. When the mind comes to rest, restrained by the practice of yoga. So beautiful. Niruddham yoga sevaya. Outstanding. It must just start, you must have horripulations. Your hair must stand on end when you read these lines. When the mind restrained, because you're trying to do this all the time. And this is what the Shastras are saying. And it has to strike a chord. You're not giving license to the mind, allowing it to wander recklessly. You're all the time trying to restrain the mind through the practice of yoga. Niruddham yoga sevaya. So when the mind, restrained by the practice of yoga, attains quietude, and when seeing the self alone by the self, it is satisfied in the self. restrained by yoga refers to the three yogas, the karma yoga, the bhakti yoga, and the jnana yoga. When you perform the three yogas, so what happens when you perform the three yogas? The desires drop. When the desires drop, you have got a control over your mind. Then your mind comes to rest. When your mind attains quietude, then you come to the state where seeing the self alone by the self is satisfied in the self. That is the state of realization. So what he is talking about here is actually the entire spiritual practice, the spiritual path. The three yogas, when you perform the three yogas, karma, bhakti, jnanam, you all will come to a state what is known as uparati. Uparati is a state of mental withdrawal from the world. This is a very high spiritual state. I would say a person at the state of uparati, he is at the state of 70 to 80% of spiritual elevation, evolution. 80% spiritual developed person, his mind does not run into the world. He's mentally withdrawn from the world. That is known as uparati. Have you all heard this term before? Is this familiar? If you have not taken note of it, uparati is a state you reach before you get into a state of meditation. So this again a very clear quality control. The mind is not rushing into the world. Why? Because the desires are not there. And how have you got to the desires? Through the karma bhakti jnanam. So karma bhakti jnanam is the main spiritual journey. Now, I will try and show this diagram. Just try and see if you can capture it. Is this clear to you all? Is this clear? Not clear or clear? Not able to. So the three, I had a different drawing, which, as I said, is all, which I had lost it. So you just have to create a simple path. Three paths lead you to a point of mental withdrawal. Once you cross this state, then you would practice what is known as dharana. Dharana is known as an open-eyed meditation. So karma, bhakti, jnanam leads you to a state of mental withdrawal from the world. Then you do open-eyed meditation. Open-eyed meditation is you are very few desires. You are still active in the world, but you're still thinking of only one goal, which is realization. So in and through those activities, you are attuned to the goal of realization. And then comes a point where you do dhyana. Dhyana is you sit at a place with your eyes closed, where you're not active anymore physically. Even mentally, you're very less active. So comes a state of dhyana, and after dhyana, you attain realization, which is that samadhi, where the individual merges with the self. So all of that is being captured in this verse. So when you restrain the mind through yoga, it comes to rest, uparati. Then when seeing the self by the self, which is through the process of meditation, you are satisfied in the self. You are totally contented. And the crux of all this is keeping your mind introverted at all times. If you keep your mind introverted, you are in the spiritual journey. Introverted means, what does introverted mean? Ushama, what does introvertedness or introversion mean?
Namaste, Guruji. You are totally away from, you are totally away from the worldly desires. You are totally into within your own world and your own goal of self-realization.
At every step of the way, you have to be introverted. Not somebody may not conceive self-realization. Is it? I don't know how many amongst you all conceive self-realization, but you could be an introverted person.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, any one of you say, sir, my goal is attaining moksha. I'll be flattered, to be frank. Nothing else matters to you but realization. No, if you are genuinely, nothing else matters. My whole, I can be ripped apart, upside down, front down, up, inside out, I can be ripped apart. All I value is goal of realization. Nothing else I value for it. If that's what any one of you are resonating, then my salutations and prostrations to you. It's an extremely unrealistic goal, I would say. One day we'll evolve to that state, but self-realization is too loose a term everybody uses. Self-realization, you must be like Ekalavya. He only wanted archery. That's all. Nothing else he wanted. Like Prahalada only wanted that moksha. He only wanted to see Lord Narayana. Nothing else. Nothing mattered to him. So that is the heightened introversion. But whenever we use the word introverted, what does it mean?
It means that you're got rid of the attraction or this thing involvement with the outside world, and you're more turning into your own. You're getting rid of the desires for the outside world, and you're concentrating for self-purification within yourself.
Now, only correction I would bring to that is, it's not that you are disregarding the desires and things like that. You are disregarding the world and you're bringing yourself into the equation, and you only want to purify yourself, full stop.
Okay.
When your thought and attention is on one's own purification. I could be in an imperfect environment, but my thought and attention is not on correcting the world out there, but on correcting myself. That constancy of thought of attempting self-purification is being introverted. Or when your thought and attention is on the external world, it is extroversion. So the thumb rule of spiritual path is to constantly work on your own development. That's all. The thought is on, how can I evolve? Where can I find flaw within? But isn't it so true? It is easier to find faults with others. It's
Yes.
very easy to find faults with others, but it is very difficult to find the same flaw, which could be
Within our-
many a time more magnified. It is difficult to identify within. The same flaw. It's not different. The same flaw is there within me. Many a time magnified, I miss it, but it's very easy to point it out outside, identify outside. Why does it happen? Any idea, Siddharamanji? Why does it happen that it is easy to find faults with others, but it's very difficult to find out one's own flaw?
Because we are Hariom Guruji, because we are extroverted.
Unmute.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. We are worldly. We are all the time looking at others and not focused on ourselves.
It's easy to find faults with others. It's difficult to find one's own flaws. I think we lost Siddharamanji. Think about it. I don't know. I don't want to give an answer to that. But you can't just say extroversion and introversion. It's not our ego, nor ignorance. Nor is it the reflection of the environment. It's our mind. Nor is it focused on the higher. They all could be contributing, certainly. But there's a certain principle which you are practicing, which makes it very easy to find. Even you're able to pick up even infinitesimal imperfection others. It's very easy, you pick it up very, very quickly. But the same flaw within you, you miss it. Same flaw. It's not a different, drawback.
Is it the ego?
Not really the ego. Ego is always an attitude where you glorify yourself, isn't it? But why I can't find my own flaw? See, once you get the clarity of the answer, it just amazes us. See why we are able to find faults. Why we are able to find faults of others very easily. Some inputs are coming. Let me take it from Ashram is saying expectation from the outside world, but no expectation from self. May not be ma. Thinking no. Because your own mind does not question your own thoughts, actions, and motivations. No, Badriji. We see others as somebody different. There is no feedback. Looking outward is easier due to sense organs in the mind, no oneness with others. In fact, Ushama is close. When you say you see others as somebody different, what is happening when you are able to find fault with others is you are more objective. You are standing apart and watching that person. So you separate yourself from that person. You are having an objective distance. You are standing apart and making that assessment. So you're able to evaluate or take a stock or see what it is from a distance, as a result of which you're able to clearly see what is there. But when it comes to oneself, you're too involved with your own personality. You're not objectively looking at yourself as you look at others. So the quality of objectivity is that which helps you to find flaw, whether in the world or in yourself. And objectivity means you are a sakshi. You are a witness. You stand apart and watch. Now, we are not objective to ourselves. So if somebody says anything about you to you, what is the first thing? Instantly you justify, isn't it? Instantly you resist. Instantly you say no to it. Why? Because you are not seeing yourself as others are seeing you. You're too involved with yourself. So since you're too involved with yourself, you don't know where you are, what's wrong with you. So there you miss the point. You fail to see it. So, but if you're introverted and if you're objective, you will be able to take a very clear assessment of oneself, and you'll be able to identify where you're going wrong. And the movement, and one who is embarked on self-perfection, self-transformation, self-improvement, he will not waste his time in reforming the world, because there's so much needs to be corrected within. So much. This whole lifetime effort is not sufficient to rectify. Why should I be bothered of somebody else and you live your life, man? You want to eat and drink and wine and dine, that is your life, your priorities. You want to ruin your life, you go and ruin your life. You want to uplift your life, you uplift your life. I have got nothing to do with it. I have no other interest and attention but to transform myself. You become disinterested in the world. You leave the world as it is. Not in a negative sense, please. I'm not saying negative sense. You will strive to create perfection everywhere. Wherever that needs correction, you'll correct. But your priority is your own transformation. You will not go about fiddling with lives of others. You not sit and complain, not sit and grumble. So that's the thumb rule, as I said. So if you have that principle, then you embark on this journey of karma, bhakti, jnanam, uparati, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. We're not making the whole concept trivial. I'm only trying to explain the thumb rule principle required for being in the spiritual journey. Okay. We'll come back. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Shri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om.